This is actually week 14, day 26. I do not have week 13, day 25, which was a Friday. Okay, NET-200. Today we talked about the application layer protocols. We did quite a bit of work on the small network practice. 2 chapters left. Pretty crazy, but this was the network material that we worked on. We picked one student, Chris Wilson, and we used his example. This was a configuration here for this router. Then we had a loop back situation to configure. This created a little bit of a interesting scenario to do this work. So what we did was we have this network, and then we can change any of these bits that we want. Now since that's a 26, they must have borrowed 2 bits. So that leaves us these two, in which we can make 4 networks. So we subnetted that out, the 4 networks here. Here were the 2 bits. Then we calculated the ranges for each of those 4 networks. Now, if you look at this address here, 254, that must have come from this range. So we used this network for here. So all the devices and the switches in that network have to come from this range. Now the tricky part, another tricky part, is this loopback. Let's take a look at that here. So that has to be on a different network. So what you have to do is you have to select one of these 3, because those are the 3 you had left. You don't have to do any more subnetting. You can just pick one of those 3 and assign those addresses to the loopback. How this network functions: well, we have devices connected to the switch, to the router. Students configure the router to the multi-layered switch. Goes through a router to our regular network and gets converted to a 172.20.00 address. We have this address is the default gateway inside this switch here. And then when the traffic moves from here to the firewall, it gets NATed again to a public address, and then it can get routed out to the internet. I did mention a couple things here. I talked about how we have a PC at my desk, and I have a rollover cable going to this device to allow me to connect to any of the devices coming off of there. The students log into the work server, and so they actually go, I'll just give you another route, they come through this way to get here to connect to their devices. It's a lot for one screen, but I'm not done yet. One more thing to talk about. When we put a device on the network, we need to configure an IP address. Either we type it in statically or it gets an address through DHCP. We need DNS if we want to use that to go to the internet, and we need a gateway IP, which in this case is this router IP right up here. Alright, so we reviewed the OSI and the TCP IP model. From the application, we talked about these protocols. Now, we've talked about all these protocols before, but we talked a little more specific about them here. HTTP, HTTPS, port 443 or port 80, World Wide Web, URLs, browsers, HTML, this whole internet thing, or a way to access sites on the internet. We talk about sending email, simple mail transfer protocol. This sends the mail, and this gets it back off the mail server so you can read it POP or IMAIL. And we have the ports listed here. Talk about domain name services, 53, DNS. That whole idea of a URL and a domain name, we can track that to an IP. We talk about file transfer protocol, trivial file transfer protocol. This is TCP, this is UDP. We talk about secured shells. We can send a file from one location to another, then we can send the hash. We can hash the file. If the hashes match, file transferred without error. Talked about DHCP, getting addresses, and the message block. Oh, we also mentioned SSH. All of this is in the curriculum. Curriculum, chapter 10. And basically, chapter 10, a little more detail than I did, these particular things from that application layer. Students like this done by next week, by Monday. This we turned in today, and we're going to work on some more things like that on Friday. So you want to go through chapter 10, the curriculum. You have this to work on, you have the practice final to take. So we have a lot to do this week. And that's it.